What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you the top 5 best hatchet builds in New World Aeternum that are optimized for both PvE and PvP. Also, as we will cover a lot of builds, so not to spend too much time, for each setup I will give you a quick overview of its playstyle. Then as well I will explain the best skill tree setup, then what gear should you wear, then even how many attributes should you allocate for each stat and much more. So, moving over to the first build, which is the greatsword and the hatchet. This setup's main focus is on high single target damage. These weapons can be used interchangeably, as both have very high DPS, and hatchet is mainly the mobility / single target king, while the greatsword is more for CC and AoV damage. Overall, this build has amazing survivability and excellent solo and group viability. You can also have two playstyles, so either way you can use the greatsword as your primary damage weapon and simply keep the hatchet for survivability or only for its berserk burst windows. Or then the alternative is to play this build with the hatchet as the primary weapon and then the greatsword for its AoV and low cooldowns. So let's take a look at the build. For our gear choice we will go with the light category, as this will give us the perfect balance between damage and survivability. In my opinion, almost all melee builds should wear something above the light category, because as you are required to fight in close range, so being low HP and weak on defense can turn out to be very devastating. However, if you use this build right, then you can turn this disadvantage into a huge strength, so get in and out of fights and destroy all the enemies that we see. Next we have attributes, and we should get 100 strength, then from 300 to 350 dexterity, then 25 focus and also 200 constitution. But personally for me these stats work the best, as we can do insane amount of damage and still be tough enough to withstand hard enough fights. Then next up we have the skill tree, and this is how it should look like for the greatsword. These nodes and the overall layout is structured around increasing your AoV damage and having skills to catch running enemies, as most of our damage we will do with the greatsword, so having great AoV potential is huge. And then again, this is how it should look like for the hatchet. So this time we built it around increasing our survivability. And mobility, which definitely the greatsword will lack. If you are interested in the best gear, perks, consumables and everything else, then keep watching until the end of the video. And overall, if you are looking for a very fun and high DPS build, then here you go. So, moving over to the next build, which is the lifestaff and the hatchet. This setup's main focus is on utilizing its mobility and self-sustain of the hatchet. All from the lifestaff you will get incredible amount of healing and range DPS. Most players like to use this build for speedrunning solo content and leveling, as this hatchet and lifestaff combo has so much healing and single target damage that you can easily solo bosses and any other content. And at least personally for me, I haven't ever used a healing potion or even died, because of how powerful this build is against PvE content. So let's take a look at our setup. For our gear choice we will go with the medium category, as we are going to be mainly in close range, so we want to be tough enough to withstand hard enough fights, and not too heavy which would slow us down and prevent us from escaping the enemy attacks. In my opinion, 90% of all lifestaff builds should always wear medium, as it is the perfect balance which gives you high healing and good defense. Then next we have attributes, and we should get 50 strength, then 400 focus, and finally 200 constitution. Similar like other melee healer builds, we want to keep this 2:1 ratio if we compare focus against constitution. On top of this, we want to use the amber gem on our hatchet to convert its strength scaling to now scale with focus. Next up we have the skill tree, and this is how it should look like for the hatchet. So this specific layout was structured around using the best skill in the game, the berserk mode, and then just buffing and supporting it with as many perks and other secondary skills as possible. Because of this setup we can do both, so be a melee bruiser or just use it as a last ditch survival tool. And then again, this is how it should look like for the life staff. So this is the best healer setup in the game, where we are using easily spammable skills with short cooldowns and healing ground, which we can just place, then switch to the hatchet and do big damage, while not even worrying about our HP going down. If you are interested in the best gear, perks, consumables and everything else, then keep watching until the end of the video. Overall, if you don't ever want to die, and if you're looking for the perfect solo player build to speedrun most of the PvE content, then here it is. Next we have a very fun build, which is the bow and the hatchet. This setup is known as the toxic arrow build, because we will utilize a lot of damage over time effects that will make our enemies take a lot of damage over a long period of time. This build is ideal for leveling and small scale PvP, as you get insane amount of mobility and damage, so you can easily hit enemies few times and then run around them while waiting for your cooldowns to come back up. So let's take a look at the setup, and for the weight we can either way go with a light or medium armor. I personally prefer medium, as it allows me to stay closer to my enemies, especially in PvE. But if you want to use this build purely for PvP as a hit and run playstyle, then you can also sacrifice defense and go with full light armor and with maximum amount of dexterity. So while we are on this topic, let's take a look at our attributes, and we want to get 25 strength, 400 plus dexterity, 25 in focus, and 200 constitution. As I've mentioned, I want to mix and match my survivability and damage, but if you purely want to go full DPS, then you can easily take 100 constitution and take dexterity all the way to 500. Then next we have our skill tree, and this is how it should look like for the bow. So we mainly focus all of our skills on easy to hit abilities, so we can damage multiple enemies at once. Also, we build to increase the duration and cooldown reduction as much as possible. And then next we have our hatchet, and this is how it should look like. So here we have the same thing, as we mainly build around poison and damage over time skills that we can also use from range, while still having the strongest skill in the game, the berserk mode. Overall, if you're looking for the best leveling and mob grinding build, then here you go. Then for the next build we have the hatchet with the warhammer. This setup focuses on high survivability and high AoE damage as well, as we are using the hatchet with the berserker skill, so we can damage the enemies from a range while also surviving even the toughest bosses, if we ever drop below 0 HP. If perhaps you want to be a half tank and half DPS, then this is the perfect setup for you. So for our weight we can again decide to go with the heavy or medium armor. For this setup I personally prefer to go with the full heavy, but as I've said, it is up to you. Next we have the attributes, and as we're going full tank, so we want to get about 300 strength, then 25 in dexterity, intelligence and focus, and then lastly the last 300 in constitution. And again, if you're not at the max level yet, then just simplify this by putting half points into strength and then the other half in constitution. Next let's take a look at the skill tree, and this is how it should look like for the warhammer. So pretty similar like the previous bruiser build, as we're focusing on AoE DPS over armor penetration. And then again, this is how it should look like for the hatchet. So we mainly get the berserk skill and upgrade it, while also not forgetting about getting these two debuffs. If you are interested in the best gear, perks, consumables and everything else, then keep watching until the end of the video. And overall, if you want to use a very powerful tank build that pretty much never dies, then this is it. So, moving over to the next build, which is the sword and the hatchet. This setup's main focus is on utilizing its high mobility and crowd control of the sword and shield, while from the hatchet you will be able to kill priority targets, have very incredible survivability, and then escape from danger. This build can initiate a surprise engagement and then get the target caught in a crowd control loop that will most likely result in their death. If you are looking for a very strong PvE and PvP build, then here it is. So let's take a look at the build. For our gear choice we will go with the heavy category, as this will give us incredible amount of defense, which we want to get as we are mainly a melee bruiser tank. There are also some players that prefer to go full bruiser and switch to the medium category. However, this specific setup is built to withstand very hard enemy hits. Next we have the attributes, and we should get from 350 to 400 strength, then 100 dexterity, then 25 focus, and finally 150 constitution. Then next up we have the skill tree, and this is how it should look like for the hatchet. So this specific layout was structured around using the best skill in the game, the berserk mode, and then just buffing and supporting it with as many perks and other secondary skills as possible. Because of this setup we can do both, so be a melee bruiser or a full tank. And if you play it right, then we will never die. And then again, this is how it should look like for the sword and shield. So with this one we increased our mobility even further, and buffed our hatchet weaknesses, which is not enough CC and backstab. Our primary objective will be to use sword and shield for defending and taking on enemy damage, and then switching to the hatchet for huge amount of damage and to catch or run away from the enemies. Overall, if you are interested in the best gear, perks, consumables and everything else, then keep watching until the end of the video. And if you're looking for super fun and high damage and high mobility sword and shield build, then here you go. And then for the last and final part, let's take a look at the best gear, buffs and consumables that pretty much all builds could use. And remember that this is just an example. So as far as armor goes, of course slowly but shortly you want to get to 725 gear score. And no matter if you're using light, medium or heavy, always go with the opal gem on your gear. And if you can, then try to get these perks like health, refreshing and freedom. Then as far as your weapons go, use opal gem on all of your weapons as well, as we are going to be constantly moving, so the opal gem will be getting procced pretty much 24/7. And then for weapon perks, try to get keen, vicious and refreshing move. And then last but not the least, for the runes you have two options, so either way take the stone form or the detonate. Both of them are very useful, it just depends if you need more DPS or more defense. And then for your consumables, you should already know what to do. So use honing stones for damage increase, use attribute food for plus 40 attribute stats, and also don't forget about the healing and regen potions, just in case if you get in trouble. And that's about it. So if you enjoyed this video, click like, subscribe and comment. If you're interested in more content, then check out my channel and I will see you in the next one. So take it easy, peace.